back to the Nexus Podcast. Krista Arndt is my guest. Krista is the Associate Chief Information Security Officer at the St. Luke's University Health Network, which is a 15-hospital health system in Pennsylvania and New Jersey. We're going to spend some time talking about how she and her team protect a large healthcare system in what's becoming a pretty turbulent threat environment and risk environment, especially with regard to patient safety. Before we bring in Krista, just my regular reminder to subscribe to the podcast. It's really the best way to keep up with the show and some of the great guests that we've got lined up. We're on all the major podcast platforms and pretty easy to find. So find us and subscribe. So with that, let's kick off the episode. Hi, Krista. Nice to see you. Thanks for coming on the show. Appreciate it.
Hey, Michael. Thanks for having me.
So look, just kind of as an icebreaker, I like to ask my guests about their career path and how they landed in cybersecurity. I know that I find as I ask this question that everybody has a pretty diverse experience and there isn't necessarily this direct path to cybersecurity. So what is your story in that regard?
It's crazy that you say that. I think about it a lot, and I live my life by memes, so and GIFs. So if everybody else does, we'll be really good friends. And I always think of that thing like how I expected my life to go with this little graph, and then how it actually went with just a scribble everywhere, and that was really my career path. So I started, actually, I was a teacher back in the day, and I thought like I just wanted to do something very helpful to society. And so I taught. I majored in biology, so nothing even close to technology. And then I fell into a job with the Department of Defense doing process improvement and got interested in learning business. And then I navigated a couple different jobs there. Started doing, contract line item validation, compliance, risk management, and ended up as a program manager on a program for insider threat for the government that no one else wanted because they didn't think it would grow. And I just was fascinated by security and started teaching myself and asking questions. And then along the way, moved up and out and had a few really good mentors to help me along the way. Noticing that I put in the effort and all that stuff. And, so I went from a pre-nursing degree to being a CISO here, which I never thought I would be either. It was never in the career path for me, but I realize it's a place where I can make a lot of change and kind of help people up and coming as well, who are trying to navigate the same challenges. And so it's been a privilege. And here we are today where I'm helping to run a security team for a big hospital.
Healthcare cybersecurity is one of the most complex environments I've ever kind of been involved with indirectly, obviously, but there's this kind of linkage between cybersecurity and patient care that's emerged fairly recently, I think. Can you point back to like this turning point where these two things became so intertwined?
So, look, I haven't been in healthcare a long time. I come from a background in defense, finance, crypto. So I've seen a lot of different verticals and it gives me a lot of context. But I'll tell you, when I got into healthcare and really started getting a handle on the history there, ever since the HITECH Act pushed interoperability, which I totally understand why the HITECH Act came to be, so patients can send and receive information and get better care, and the information can be accessible and accurate, et cetera. But I would say really since then, the interconnectivity really funneled a velocity of adoption of technology that healthcare wasn't really ready for. And so, it's very similar. We're going to, I'm sure, have a conversation about AI, but healthcare is just, being pushed to do things in a very quick time frame. And so,
Right.
Cybersecurity became a necessity because of the quick and the vast and deep adoption of technology, realizing that the technology in healthcare as we had built it out is so complex based on versus other verticals. It became a necessity, a must have. It is one of the most integral parts of our technology program.
In terms of getting the clinical side of the house, for example, on board with cybersecurity, I mean, that's not their job, but you have to, and your teams have to convey that message. How do you manage that successfully?
I'm going to give a shout out because it's a huge team effort, and we have a wonderful cybersecurity liaison, or what we call an information security liaison, who has been a member of our team for quite a few years now. And he is really a people person, and delivers that message. And so we spend a lot of time as a team rounding at other hospitals, and just meeting them where they are and saying, hey, do you have any problems? They may not have any problems, but every hospital campus gets visited at least once a month by this wonderful team of field engineers, our informatics nurses, as well as our information security liaison at minimum. And then each campus has an IT liaison. So one of the directors is essentially assigned to make sure that they get white glove service. And so, a lot of them, to your point, it's an afterthought. They may have issues, but they're running around like crazy. And so they may
Sure.
think, I'll submit the ticket later, and it never gets submitted. So we not only do that to kind of be proactive about fixing obstacles in their path, but our CIO, ACIO, and my boss, the CISO, take a very conscious role in including our clinical leadership when there are significant technology changes, to not only gain their buy-in and make sure that they understand what we're doing, but to really have them give us their input from a clinical perspective. And especially our associate chief medical informatics officer, or CMIO, they're a huge part because they have a big hand in the clinical side, so they can really bridge that gap between
Hmm.
technology and operations. And I think that whole partnership just between all of how this organization was built out really makes us successful.
And is the messaging there, again, just going back to kind of linking how cybersecurity can negatively impact patient care, or maybe not negatively, threats can negatively impact patient care?
Yeah, the message is there and it's strong. It really comes from the tippy top as well.
Yeah.
Our president, our chief operating officer, even our CFO are a huge proponent of the criticality of cybersecurity, and they echo our messaging. And really, it's funny, when I started here a couple of years ago, I was told, hey, I take, and this was by one of our leaders, I take information security very seriously, which was great. It's a wonderful culture that they breed up at the top. But obviously, if we can spend on patient care and innovation, we would totally, obviously, do that, above anything, because that's why we're here. But the messaging, truly, it comes from the top, and then it comes in the ground floor. We have a security awareness program that creates champions across the board in each of our departments to help spread that message, and to help, almost the buddy system, to say, hey, I have a problem, or I have a concern, or I don't know how to use this. And they help usher them in and make them more comfortable with using the security controls. And when we deployed passwordless across our entire organization, we used a white glove approach to really
Hmm.
partner versus throw security at them. And I think that's really critical to success.
It's really important to have that champion within those lines of business or on the tech side, right? I mean, that's invaluable.
Yeah, I think that's something that, as I came up in my career, and I'm still young in leadership, that was one of the biggest messages that resonated, no matter what position it is. It could be a clinical worker, it could be the head of an organization. They don't want to feel like they're fighting you. They want you to
Right.
understand the business. And I think you probably hear that a lot from people, right? Like CISOs are like, yeah, it's our job to understand the business. And can I tell you that that was one of the biggest hurdles that I had to overcome, is figuring out, like, what do they mean? Because everybody would say it, but no one would explain what they mean. And so it's not only understanding the business from an operational perspective, it's understanding the business from a financial perspective, understanding how purchases are made, and how strategies are composed. Like, everything about it is so critical for a security leader. And our team, actually, we teach each other to make sure everybody is on the same page when their depth of knowledge with understanding operations.
Yeah, I guess that's what they mean by speaking their language, right?
Yeah.
It's the skill, that it's those soft skills that are super important. So in terms of threats, I'm just curious, is ransomware still the biggest disruptive threat that either your bosses or the board asks your teams about? Or what else might you be cautioning them about as a security leader these days?
Yeah, I mean, when it comes down to it, ransomware is still a big threat. It's still very heavily on the radar. We're actually, on a regular basis, we run simulations to help make sure the team maintains readiness. And my concern is ransomware has been such a big topic that they may lose sight of other things going on within the industry. And so, really, I mean, vulnerability management and patching, I'm sure we'll get into it, is probably one of the biggest, the other biggest risks as well. Because when it comes down to attacks and how they're occurring, it typically results in some sort of account takeover, some exploited vulnerability, and they are able to commandeer your systems, move laterally, and do whatever they set out to do. They're obviously, we could talk about that all day. Everybody has their motives.
Sure.
But I'm really, I mean, identities and safeguarding your identities for me. When I started here, I was given the identity program has been one of my biggest focus areas, because even in the realm of AI, what is AI? It is still just an identity, and identities can be exploited, and non-human identities have always been a big focus area. So that's another thing. I mean, ransomware, the exploitation of accounts that are not secured correctly to get keys to the kingdom and move around your systems.
I'm glad you brought up patching because everybody in healthcare knows the difficulties about patching and the need for compensating controls. But what are some of the realities? Okay, so today a major vulnerability drops in an insulin pump or some kind of critical system. What happens on your end in terms of the vulnerability management and assessing that risk and that threat? Because your hands are tied in terms of receiving a patch. It takes a while, right?
It does, yeah. And so we have a continuous, I think patching and vulnerability management has moved into CTEM, like continuous risk review and management of those vulnerabilities to figure out really what is the true impact to your organization given all of those controls around it. Medical devices, I'm glad you brought it up. It's a huge focus area, has been for a while, of the healthcare industry, because of the limits that we run into with, you can't touch the device with anything from a security perspective. So
Sure.
patching is limited, no agents, very strict vendor constraints. A lot of them have hard coded IP expectations, legacy protocols. I think our medical device leader said it takes like 2 years to get through an FDA cycle sometimes, which by that time, a lot of it is, outdated. How often do we refresh our
Yeah.
laptops because they're already outdated? And then unknown
Right.
communication patterns is a big one. And then you're worried if you change something, I mean, God forbid, you could, upend that. And medical devices are such a critical part of patient care, and also of innovation. And innovation is an area where St. Luke's thrives, that, we have paid attention to that stuff, and especially the vulnerability management. And one of the things that we've done that has probably been one of the best investments in a long time here has been microsegmentation. And so I can't take any credit for that. I give full credit to our senior enterprise security architect, Dan. But it was a wonderful project, and it was absolutely worth the effort just to kind of help, to your point, compensate for the fact that we do have limited capacity to secure medical devices.
All right, so let's talk about that project because I know that this is something that you guys went through, and um, this is a big control for healthcare organizations in the context of the patching challenges that you might have. What drove this project specifically? Was there a specific challenge you were trying to address, or?
So it was something as a best practice, because our security program likes to be as proactive as possible, that they were already trying to implement prior to my starting here 2 years ago. But traditional segmentation, takes a lot of effort. It's a lot of manual change, right? Like traditional VLANs, um, and IP addressing and everything that comes with the traditional controls can hinder your speed of getting this stuff in place. And healthcare moves so quickly. We needed a better solution. And so we actually came across an identity based solution, Elisity, which a lot of healthcare folks have adopted, and has been doing wonders for us, which is, focuses on attributes of the system. So traditional segmentation is, IP and VLAN based versus Elisity being identity based. So instead of using central firewalls, we use distributed enforcement at our switches. Instead of static rules, we use dynamic context aware policies. Instead of it requiring this like in-depth redesign that, could result in some domino effect of an issue that we can't pinpoint. It uses existing infrastructure or existing Cisco switches. And then instead of broad zones, we do a per device segmentation. So like it's really cool. And we found it by getting out and kind of going to conferences and meeting people and talking to other healthcare organizations such as Mainline, who was one of the first ones to do this. And it really identifies, which is amazing from someone who thrives on identity programs. It identifies like, hey, it's not just this nebulous asset here and we are trying to figure out what it is in this big pot, right? It can segment it down to, who uses it where, what does it do in the organization? And so all of those attributes are recorded within Elicity's platform and really helps us to control it at the level of minutia that allows us to make sure that we're not blocking devices. We know what they do. Like we have great visibility and we can make sure devices are grouped together. And so it allowed us to open up our doors to some more innovation when it comes to surgical robotics, which has been awesome from the clinical perspective.
So before we get into the robotics part of it, just segmentation is notoriously complex. And I'm just curious from a perspective of, for example, trying to segment medical devices properly. What are the chances for disruption if this isn't correctly done? I mean, what are some of the things that you guys had to think through as you were implementing this initiative?
Yeah, I mean, it's very common, right?
Yeah.
So instead of having to deal with complex firewall rules, for example, where, I mean, someone here tells a story who's been here a while on my team, how when he was young in his career, he accidentally changed a firewall rule that caused an outage for like hours. And so even something as simple as that, and I am not by far going to say that I'm an architectural expert, which is why like I am where I am and Dan where he is. But just the outages by the complex chain of changes that you have to make in traditional VLAN setups is a huge concern. And
Right.
so Elisity has simplified that significantly for us, where you don't have that chain of events where you can be searching for a day and a half as to why, it maybe a simple rule was accidentally changed and you don't have to search and try to put that chain together as to why. Like it really reduces the time that teams are spending just doing damage control, and it significantly obviously reduces the probability, so that way they can move on to bigger and better things.
Yeah. And you mentioned, the quality and level of visibility you have. That really is the necessary first step. I mean, kind of talk about what, that excellent visibility and complete or as complete as you can get an asset inventory of the devices in your organization. What does that enable in terms of the rest of the security program?
Yeah, I mean, I come down to it as a security leader that we can't secure what we don't know. And so, identification of things on our network and what they do and how long have they been there, who has touched them, and then feeding that telemetry back and forth. I think Gartner coined the term like mesh network, right? Like everything talking to everything. And really that's what we're getting to here is that telemetry can actually be fed into our SIM. It can be fed into our identity resilience provider, Paris, where we can then correlate and enrich that across all of our platforms to really have a near real-time understanding of what's going on, how it's being used. Is it working correctly? Are we doing something to block it? Like, is it secured correctly? And so for me, the graph that you get in Elisity and the details that you get from those devices, the tagging that occurs when you set this up, because I oversee a great security operations team, has enriched our data to understand what's going on in our environment in near real time. And then obviously the asset validation is huge. If there's a newest asset that shows up, it needs to be allowed on our network. Like, we're not going to automatically allow that stuff. It gets isolated in a bucket. So yeah, all of the above. So much opportunity when you have something like this with so much visibility.
You shared some stats before we talked in terms of some of the wins here, how quickly this project came together. I think it was 45 days. No outages, no IP address changes. How big of a win is it to have no IP address changes for devices that are segmented?
Oh
Is this
my
a big
God,
concern
huge.
going in? Yeah.
Yeah, that's a big concern, especially uptime is a key metric that everything that we design in healthcare is designed around uptime of our core critical systems and capabilities to make sure that you can provide patient care. Imagine if someone was coming in the emergency room and because of an accidental or an incorrect IP address change, or you had to change an address and we had to wait for something to update, that a system was unavailable for care and how that would affect somebody's life. So, I mean, super critical that there was absolutely no downtime and that the platform is built to facilitate that with the understanding of the complexity of healthcare.
Tell me a little bit about the robotic surgery part of this story, because I think it's pretty cool, and just like maybe give me a before and after of how this whole project enabled this to happen.
Okay. I can go into a little bit detail. I don't know a lot about
Sure.
the specific robotics that were being considered, but I can tell you the backstory here is we have a very tight risk management program. And so one of the things that, and again, this is where it goes back to our conversation of the support of the organization, the culture of they understand why we make the decisions we do. But, one of our clinical arms wanted to bring aboard some innovative surgical robotics, and it didn't quite meet our security standard. And so, the answer was no. And I know in the video that Elisity did, he always, my boss, because he built this program with Dan from the ground up over about 12 years' time. And, there's a joke inside, and we hear this a lot in security. You don't want to be the office of no. And unfortunately, although they don't want to, they had to, because it's, if you don't have them isolated on their own area of the network, and if they have public or outbound access, right, like they're so easily susceptible. And a lot of these robotics and biomed devices nowadays to feed diagnostics back to some central like cloud location, something with the vendor. And it's really difficult to allow them to function correctly without that connectivity. And so we had been able to allow certain robotics to function, but have had to isolate them so they are not allowed to talk back. And so it was a little of a challenge. You could still use it, but the diagnostics, the clinicians weren't getting the diagnostics that they needed to really
Right.
improve their services. And so as soon as we had this in place, it becomes, not, no, we can't do it at all. It becomes, okay, now that we know that we have these isolated buckets and we have the blast radius contained if something happened, what can we allow to start reconnecting that outbound connectivity and allow some agility for our clinicians to really do what they do best, which is to innovate in their space.
Hmm.
So that's about the level of detail I can give.
No, it's great, and it's I think that whole discussion of security can't say no; they have to figure out how to do it safely. That's a really good example, a shining example of what that means and how to successfully carry that out.
Yeah, that's something we struggle with.
Yeah.
Everyone has every department. You can be a clinical department, you can be a chief finance officer. Everybody has their rails as to what is acceptable and what's not when it comes to a balanced risk-based program. And unfortunately, fortunately for us, we have amazing support from our senior leaders that says, I accept your rails, your recommendations, because they see what the potential outcome
Sure.
could be. But unfortunately for the clinicians, the rails had to be a little bit more stringent than we wanted to, because we needed that additional control in place somehow, right? Like, you're not going to be able to do it through those devices, but I'll put it plainly, it sucks. I got into
Yeah.
healthcare to help innovate. I was in crypto. Innovation is probably one of my favorite parts. It keeps us interested. It really lets you know that you're doing all you can to try to help patients get literally the best care in the country. And that's why we
Hmm.
ranked top in quality this year. And so the fact that the team was able to accomplish that, and big big props to our networking team, our endpoint teams in IT. Like it was a group effort. Um, but yeah, it's one of those, you second guess your decision often when you have to say no to something because you
Right.
know what the potential implications could be.
All right. So before we wrap up, I have to ask you about AI. It's obligatory. So,
Yeah.
uh,
Oh, we're going to start a drinking game now.
there you go. It always gets us through these episodes quickly. Um, so let's start with the frontier models, things like Claude Mythos, obviously really in the headlines in the last month or so. How do you anticipate, for example, vulnerability and exposure management changing in the near future because of the speed of vulnerability discovery, exploit development, really compressing because of these models?
Yeah, it's an arms race already. We talk about that constantly in my CISO signal chats. And just came back from HealthSec Boston, which is very healthcare leadership focused and sharing our concerns and what we're doing to counteract that. So, what are you seeing? Like, I think 0 days identified and exploited in like, maybe an hour and a half or something. I forget that stat that I just saw, but it is insanity. A human
Yeah.
can't physically move that fast. So Trump just came out with his mandate, and we were talking about it the other day. And so it's top of mind. And essentially, what they're trying to do as part of his AI mandate is provide funding to organizations who are trying to innovate in the vulnerability management space to help figure out how we more autonomously and more near real time not only identify, but how the heck do you patch? I mean, patch cycles can take a month. And
Right.
if you can exploit in hours, if you can identify and then exploit in hours, I mean, the humans are behind. So you really have to do something to, again, like we did with segmentation, like, you're going to get hit. So how do you limit the blast radius? But on a positive
Hmm.
end, I've seen major healthcare tech and innovation vendors using it, Anthropic, to their benefit right now and really shifting left when it comes to code quality and identifying insufficient code, insecure code, those types of things sooner in the software development lifecycle. And so, really, what we need to do now is figure out from a patch cadence. With an EMR, you don't want to patch, you can't push patches like every week, right? You have
Right.
very minimized downtimes that you can afford in an organization. So, like, how then do you work those more commonly identified vulnerabilities and code fixes into your update cycles? And so
Yeah.
that's something we're specifically seeing in healthcare. I don't know. It depends on the day. Some days I'm glass half empty, and some days I'm glass half full. I understand the implications and what we're up against when it comes to these, the autonomous attacks and, buying AI bots on the dark web. Like we're almost fighting a losing battle. But what
Yeah.
Mythos has changed the narrative on very significantly is changing us from information security into cyber and information resilience. And because organizations are not thinking anymore, CISO, you have to prevent everything. They're
Right.
thinking, okay, we know, like the message finally has sunk in. We know you can't prevent everything. Where do you stand, or where do we stand as far as resilience perspective? How hard can we fight back? How long can we stand before we are able to eradicate and get business back up and running as usual? And really
Yeah.
revisiting, which is cool from an infrastructure perspective and from a financial perspective, revisiting truly what are our core critical assets that we need to sustain, and where does it make sense to invest in their resilience versus the conversations where you try to tier things out and everybody thinks their stuff is the most critical, so everybody wants to spend on resilience, and it just doesn't always make sense. So the CIOs are
Right.
kind of happy about that.
Hmm. For sure. Yeah, you mentioned the AI executive order. There's provisions in there too to extend these models. It would seem to smaller hospitals and critical infrastructure that may not be so well resourced. Sounds like there may be an opportunity to leverage these models as defensive tools as well, which is encouraging.
Yes. And so if I were a small rural hospital, and like, I was a CISO in national orthopedics prior to this role, and my team was small but very mighty. And so if you hire some really key go-getters who are interested um, in dabbling in the technology and figuring out, like, what can you use it for that it wasn't made to use for,
Right.
I think like instead of investing in numbers in a security team, because rural always has an issue with funding, which is why they're, subject to getting the free AI help. Like, where can you invest strategically with someone who maybe came from a tech organization and wants to dabble and do really cool things?
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a lot of opportunity there. I like that our government has put more and more emphasis on small and rurals, because Health ISAC and Health Sector Coordinating Council, which I'm a part of, has been lobbying for help for rural healthcare for a very long time. And so it'll be interesting to see where that goes. We're a small community, and so even hospital systems like us like to jump in and say, hey, you're getting this, how can we help you innovate with it? Because we have a pretty vast team.
So as a last question, just another AI question, but from a productivity perspective, an efficiency perspective, where are you seeing just AI in general making improvements in either time savings or, again, efficiency, et cetera?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I'll tell you, one of the cool things we have done with it is where, I don't know specifically what you call it. I call it a design partner, but a partner with Microsoft, and we test out a lot of their stuff before it goes. So we're in private preview, and we were able to do some neat things with Copilot. I think there was an article about that on the internet, but ultimately it saved us. Incident reports are the obvious, but what was a really cool thing is the autonomous triaging of phishing, the autonomous triaging of tickets, to take that tier one, for example, and really help your analysts spend time doing the deep dive analysis that they should be doing, instead of going over. I mean, we have like 11,000 tickets a month through security operations. That's insane. Man. So imagine a team of, I think we're like 5 people or 6 people right now going through 10,000 tickets a month on top of supporting projects, right?
You're never going to win.
No. So they were so ecstatic when we partnered with Microsoft to incorporate Copilot into analysis. So they have a great analysis engine in Defender and Sentinel, and then really triaging those tickets with the help of their Defender for Experts team on the back end, and taking all that administrative burden off, the incident reports for, all the documentation. Truthfully, from an investigation standpoint, it has been phenomenal. It really helps point you to what your next investigation step should be, instead of figuring out it or trying, chasing your tail.
All right, Krista, I think that's a good place to leave it. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. This is great stuff, and I think there's a lot of valuable information for the listeners here, so I appreciate your time.
Yeah, likewise. Always happy to share. One of the biggest things we can do in security is share with our peers where it makes sense. So hopefully it helps someone. And
it makes a difference.
Wants to share with me. Yeah.
Makes a difference. All right. Thanks, Krista. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Have a great day. Bye.